Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be talking about a massive winter storm that'll be impacting a large chunk of the United States over the next few days. We'll also be discussing another big storm that'll impact the United States next week that could bring a mix of severe weather along with a threat for another winter storm. I'll give you the latest breakdown on both of these storms and more in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today, beginning with the northern plains, which is actually where there is a low pressure system currently located, which has actually been bringing a winter storm to the Midwest over the past 12 to 24 hours. This will eventually start to weaken off as it moves over Michigan, but this will still cause the threat for some snow over the next 24 hours. Believe it or not, that low pressure system is not the one that's the most concerning right now. In fact, down in the southeastern United States, there has been some severe weather with damaging winds, large hail, and even a couple of tornadoes over the last 24 hours. And this is an area that we're watching for a low pressure system that will eventually develop and move off into the Atlantic Ocean and eventually start to track its way up to the north and northeast, which could bring a nor'easter to areas in New England. This would include the threat for several inches of snow, in some cases maybe even up to 2 feet of snow, along with a threat for some very high winds. So this will be really something to watch for over the next several days. And again, I'll have a big discussion on this here in just a moment. But going over the next 24 hours as we head into tomorrow morning, there will still be some showers and storms, marginal severe storms possible down in Florida as we go into tomorrow. But again, look at where that low pressure system is. It is just off the coast of North Carolina, and this will eventually start to move up to the north and northeast. Now, there will be some snow that begins as early as tomorrow morning in the northeast, but most of this will just be light snow. But once that low pressure system starts to rapidly intensify just off the east coast of Virginia as well as North Carolina, this is where we're going to start to see some really hefty snow start to really build in. We'll be talking about some heavy snow along with the threat for even some very high winds, and then eventually going through Tuesday into Wednesday. Look at that low pressure system, 977 millibars. That is essentially like a category 1 type hurricane when it comes to pressure. Now again, we're not looking at a category 1 hurricane here, but it is a very similaristic sort of thing because we will be watching for the threat of wind gusts as high as 70 miles per hour as well. Eventually going through Wednesday into Thursday, we'll be watching for another storm to develop over really a large chunk of the United States. I'll talk about more on that here in just a moment. Now, in terms of watches and warnings across the country, winter storm watches are in effect for those in the Northeast. Winter storm warnings still in effect for Wisconsin and as well as Minnesota. That is with what we're seeing right now out there, just some light to moderate snow still remaining. And over the next 12 to 24 hours, we'll still be watching for some light to moderate snow with a couple of bands of heavy snow closer to where that pressure is the lowest. You can see here, this is where our pressure is currently the lowest. That's where our low pressure system that's very weak is located, and that's where all the snow is basically being centered around. But once we go through tomorrow, a lot of this will start to weaken out. The pressure is going to become much higher, so really, if anything, light snow will be the only thing that we'll be watching across the Midwest. Once we go into Monday afternoon and evening, there actually could be a little bit of lake effect snow that may accumulate an additional inch to 2 inches of snow across areas like Michigan, but that threat does seem to be pretty low at this time. Now, in terms of the Northeast, this is where we're going to be watching for a lot of stuff over the next 24 to 48 hours, and it's really going to be a pretty big event. So beginning with Monday morning, again, that's what I mentioned, there will be some light snow across this region. The low pressure system is way down to the south, so we will not be talking about much of any sort of travel impacts on Monday. But once we get closer to Monday night, that is when that low pressure system, look to your bottom of your screen here, that is when the low pressure system is centered about a couple hundred miles south of New England, and this is when we're going to start to see some snow start to ramp up, more of the light to moderate variety of snow. And then eventually going into the overnight hours Monday into Tuesday morning, that is when things become very heavy. And again, look at the low pressure system, 984 millibars by Tuesday morning. So this will rapidly intensify here across the Northeast, and eventually we'll still be watching for a threat of very heavy snow across areas like New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and as well as Rhode Island, and even back through areas in southeast New York. We'll be watching for some very hefty snowfall. Now, when we look at the European model, very similar sort of story here. We'll be watching for some heavy snow going into Tuesday morning, and eventually by the afternoon and evening hours, we'll be watching for a transition closer to the coastal regions to snow. So for those right along the southern coast there of New England, that is where it'll begin with rain, but it will transition at some point, most likely to some sort of rain and snow mix. So we'll see some sort of accumulation there. Again, low pressure system will become very strong overnight Tuesday into Wednesday morning, 973 millibars, and eventually going into Wednesday afternoon and evening, this finally shifts off to the east. Now, in terms of snowfall accumulation, this is just an estimate from the European model for right now, but it does seem like we'll see some pretty hefty snowfall accumulation. And again, there could be some areas that get upwards of 1 to 2 feet. Look at these pockets here. Those are the areas that we'll be watching for the threat of upwards of 12 to 24 inches of snow. Otherwise, there will probably at least be a widespread variety of 4 to 8 inches, with a lot of areas though getting around 8 to 12 inches, especially in Massachusetts. Coastal regions, as I mentioned before, not really going to see nearly as much, especially if you're right along the coastline. Snowfall accumulation will be between a coating to maybe upwards of 3 inches of snow. It depends on where you are at. Again, if you're a little bit further up to the north, closer to areas like Boston, you may see a little bit more snow accumulation there. Now, in terms of winds, the winds will be very high out of this system. In fact, we will be talking about wind gusts as high as 70 miles per hour as we go throughout Tuesday afternoon. And this is by about 2 o'clock on Tuesday. Wind gusts will start to get upwards of 50 miles per hour. Along the coastline is where we're really going to be talking about the highest wind gusts. Further inland, I would expect more of a 30 to 45 mile per hour range for wind gusts, with an isolated area seeing 50 to 55. But once we go into Tuesday evening, look at Barnstable. Upwards of 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts will be possible back over on Cape Cod and Nantucket. This is an area that we'll be watching for the highest wind gusts out of this nor'easter as we go again into Tuesday night, and as well as into Wednesday morning as that low pressure system moves out. Now, I did mention that there is going to be another storm that we'll be watching over the central United States late this week. This is the threat for at least some severe weather in the southern plains through maybe even the Mississippi Valley, and then another threat for a winter storm back up into the Midwest. So we'll have to watch this very closely. But aside from this, the atmospheric rivers will start to wind down a bit more, which will lead to lesser of these low pressure systems coming from California, which is where this one will, by the way, be coming from, is that ongoing atmospheric river event back over in California. Also, another threat with this entire low pressure system will be the colder air. Once we go into Thursday and Friday, we'll be talking about a large chunk of the United States going back to below freezing, at least during the overnight hours, sometime in the Saturday or Sunday. So watch out for this. Make sure you're keeping a close eye on the weather forecast as we go into next weekend, because this could very well bring a pretty big cold blast across a large chunk of the country. Could even include areas like Texas, all the way back through the Dixie Alley. Florida, probably going to stay right around average, so I wouldn't be too concerned there, but definitely something to watch out for going into next weekend. Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting.